So it's time now for us to bring this home. We've had 30 hours almost of conversation, and in the last minutes we've talked about explosive rise in the growth of DG. We've talked about a potential explosive rise in the growth of storage as prices come down. We've talked about new consumer controls and interest in taking control of energy. And we've talked about new ways for consumers to participate. What we're going to do next is something we've never done at the symposium. We're going to bring the consumer to this stage and hear their views on the things that I just mentioned.
Mike Petouhoff from Apple, always on the cutting edge as a consumer of energy, and there's endless stories, so I guess I'll let Mike tell them rather than me.
Thanks, Steve. What I thought might be useful if we talk about today is Apple's journey to 100% renewable worldwide, what we've learned from that, and then in particular focus on our efforts back in California on the new campus and how it deals with the issue of grid integration, and specifically as a microgrid that's dispatchable, that is also a 100% renewable solution. So let me first talk about our journey to 100% renewables. Let me say that we find it useful as we meet our own goal that we can also demonstrate to decision makers and government agencies that this can be done without the world falling apart. And what's interesting is, in every state we have a different regulatory model, and every country we operate in it's a different regulatory model, yet we found it's possible to do. Let me just share a few quick examples. Our first entry into this field was really our data center in Maiden, North Carolina. We actually did a PERPA QF qualified facility right adjacent to the 13-acre data center. We put a 100-acre solar farm. We've actually tripled that now and have 10 megawatts of fuel cells supplied by directed biogas, meeting the energy needs there in North Carolina in the regulatory model that was appropriate for that state. In Nevada, we had a totally different structure, and we chose to partner with the utility in a way that we designed, financed, and built a new type of technology appropriate for the desert sunlight there. And it's an interesting regulatory approach in that we designed and built it. The utility operated it from day one and can integrate it into their generation fleet in the long term. So we create additionality, but let the utility do what they like to do best. In Oregon, we have both direct access wholesale markets and PERPA QFs. We've done wind and solar, and here's a picture of the river that feeds some of our micro hydro plants. So we're using hydro in a way that doesn't create any new impoundments. We're actually capturing the energy from water flowing through irrigation canals that have no fish in them. There's no impoundment, no valley flooded, but we're producing power there. We have a couple models that are helpful there. In Arizona, there really wasn't really much in the way of consumers being able to green their load, so we worked directly with the utility SRP to create a new solar plant that will supply the energy needs of our data center there. So where does this leave us? At least in the United States, as of January 2013, we are 100% renewable in the United States, meaning that all of the energy we consume, we create an offsetting amount of renewables in the same grid region in which we operate. We also have work overseas. Let me talk about that. So our first efforts was in Sichuan, China, which is near the city of Chengdu. If you've ever been to Chengdu, you actually cannot usually see the sun because the pollution is so thick. So this is on the plateau above the city, and we sized two 20-megawatt solar plants to meet all the needs of our commercial and retail facilities in China, using this, working with State Grid and using the national policy there. In Singapore, we were told there really isn't room for 100-acre solar farms. It's a very dense urban environment. So we worked with Singapore Power to utilize our rights under the contestable load, contest the fossil fuel generation, and provide our own generation through hundreds of rooftops on adjacent buildings, working with the housing authority. We put solar, distributed solar, to meet our grid generation needs. You'll see a combination of behind the meter and grid solutions and combinations of the two. I'll also say that we have over 500 retail stores around the world that are using various forms of utility or purchased energy that are renewable now. And we're actually challenging our suppliers to follow suit. We've gotten several suppliers that are now committed. We're asking all of them to do so, and we're asking them to do this as well. Globally, just for Apple's footprint, we are now actually at 93%. Every year we update this number and it tells us what work we have to do. We have a lot of work to do overseas, but it's not just getting from 93 to 100, it's actually maintaining 93 because as we delight our customers, we have huge load growth. So staying at 93 is actually harder than going from 93 to 100. And we're talking about what we'll need to do as this gets larger over time. Let me shift gears now and talk about our new campus. Now, I like to say when I see this picture, someone spoke earlier about the zero net energy goal for California in 2020 and 2025. Our new campus is a giant zero. And it, in fact, is a zero net energy. But the important story here is it's not just another 100% renewable story. It is a dispatchable microgrid. So let me talk about our thought process for this. So the first thing we did, if you remember the old televisions used to have a coarse tuning knob and a fine tuning knob. The first approach was to create some correspondence between the load profile and the generation profile on-site and off-site. So the top graphic there is the summer generation and consumption. The bottom is the winter. The light green is the fuel cells, which supply our base load steady throughout the year. We size those for the winter solstice weekend. And then we said, okay, let's look at the solar, and we actually have 16 megawatts DC on-site solar between the building and the parking structures. And the dark green is that output, more in the summer, less in the winter, as the building uses more or less. And that meets most of our energy load. The remainder actually is the blue coming from an off-site solar plant through direct access. So we have a little bit of each thing. But what's most interesting is that it's tied together in a microgrid. So let's look under the hood and see what that's composed of. Our microgrid has these fuel cells, it has the on-site solar, it's accommodating the off-site solar, but we also have the ability to dispatch the building through load response, and we have 400 on-site employee car charging stations, which also can be modulated, and we have a storage battery. So we really like the idea that this is a two-way communications over in the grid, which is a network. We just don't have watts flowing. We also have bits and bytes of information flowing. And it's not just from the utility to the load, it's a two-way conversation. On the right part of the slide, you see that our grid-connected solar project. I think Tom Steyer mentioned this yesterday. This is our California Flats project coming online that will serve our meters in California through direct access for this campus and others. And as expected, it would have a day-ahead coordinator, a schedule coordinator that will check in with Cal ISO and give a day-ahead prediction as to what's coming to the bus bar there. But our campus will have a schedule coordinator as well. We're going to look at the net between the projected building energy consumption the next day, based on the weather patterns and the heating and cooling loads, and the generation profiles, and report the net of that and put that into the grid. And so we'll have a schedule coordinator both for the campus and for the remote microgrid, and these two will work together. So we really think it's a model of not just renewable, but if we're successful in getting to greater renewable penetration, we need to deal with intermittency and dispatchability, and we think it's a step forward in that area. And I'd like to say this isn't just a pie chart or a pie in the sky or some kind of futuristic vision. This is a campus under construction as we speak. We plan to move in 2017. Let me say that the way we're going to move in will be acceptable, but it won't be optimal. And we really think there's some regulatory challenges to overcome to make it more optimal, which really means that many others could do this as well. And we're really working hard to address some of those regulatory issues to make it more optimal for others to be able to do this as well. But it's a real-life project. We actually cannot move in unless we have the microgrid in operation, because it's a condition of approval under AB 900. We promised that we would be 100% renewable, and the Air Board asked us to address how we're going to deal with intermittency, and we said, okay, we hadn't told you, but we plan a microgrid, and that aspirational goal then became a regulatory requirement. So we have to do this to be able to move in, so we want to make this work.
Thanks, Mike, and that actually leads to a good first question for everyone here. You mentioned that there are some regulatory hurdles to becoming fully operational as a campus. At every level, I think, particularly for businesses, both the suppliers of electricity, but also for Susan's customers and others, Sam, maybe you as well, there are better regulatory environments and there are not so great regulatory environments to operate in. We've got a lot of regulators in the room, both from California regulatory agencies as well as from out of state. What are the things that can be changed from a regulatory perspective that would make it much easier for you to be able to move your technologies forward and to achieve, in particular, some of your renewable energy goals? You can start, Mike, but anybody please answer that question.
Steve, let me give you my top three. The first really is removing the obstacles and dealing with the details for distributed storage. I'll come back to that in a moment. Secondly is to removing the obstacles to voluntary renewables participation. And thirdly, a follow-on to that is to recognize that maybe the utility RPS is no longer the only game in town in terms of statewide renewables achievement. There's direct access customers like ourselves who are doing renewables, a growing number of CCAs, And the RPS not only doesn't capture that, it actually competes with it, makes life harder for those guys. So let me talk about each one of those. So for the microgrid, everything that Susan talked about is great. We need to do that, but the regulations evolve for a completely different set of objectives than we have now, and they're frankly not very helpful. The first step is to interconnect. We've seen that be difficult. It's increasingly difficult now that utilities want to participate in the storage market, and maybe there's a conflict of interest to have a barrier to others entering the market that they want to participate in now. It's very difficult. We found that even though we're doing something to ease grid impact, we were asked to pay additional fees for, because we wanted to use a microgrid. John Wellinghoff spoke articulately about one aspect we think is important, which is it's not just the size of the storage, but the speed. And I would say what we're doing initially, which is to do net energy metering with proxy demand response, regulators will know what that is great, but it's kind of like taking the winner of the Kentucky Derby and putting that thoroughbred into a pony ride. We're going to use proxy demand response, which is like, okay, we can shed some load this afternoon. That's fine, but we have 15-minute peaker plants, we have 8-minute peaker plants. I got a 6-second microgrid, 6 microsecond microgrid. That's a fast resource. We're not fully recognizing that. And in fact, the WDAT tariff would do that, but it's a wholesale tariff for a retail customer. We say we want distribution, or we want storage in the distribution network, but a distribution customer by definition is a retail customer, so it's difficult to combine the wholesale and retail. So we're trying to do proxy demand response as a way to start. We think the real solution would be to add ancillary services, specifically frequency regulation. You can certainly shift load from day to night, and that's good, but the speed of the current battery technology is what's most valuable to the grid. We can beat the pants off of peakers, and there's no way to really acknowledge that. Those signals should be able to be put in there. In terms of voluntary participation, it's not easy, and California is one of the easiest places. The departure fee, the PCIA, is, we think, something that's really a burden shift. And I think when we talk about protecting ratepayers, an increasing part of the rate base is direct access customers like ourselves and CCAs. We think that the transition charge of the PCA needs to be addressed in some way, but for us, you saw the building under construction. This isn't a departing load, it's never arrived. We've never been served by PG&E and never will for purposes of generation. We will be a T&D customer for PG&E, but they'll never provide generation, and we told them that the moment we requested service. So we shouldn't have to pay departing load fees, and if we do, then it should be a finite duration. In Oregon, for example, we paid an upfront fee and then it transitions out over time. Right now, we have to pay an indefinite fee forever, and it's hefty. And that's a burden for wholesale customers like making steel. It's a couple cents a kilowatt hour and growing. It's a real obstacle and really a burden just for those that are choosing to do those more creative options. And we think that's something that should be looked at. Frankly, it looks like the IRP actually considers departing load as part of the future load growth, so it's not that much of a surprise. Maybe it should only be the delta between the projection of departing load in the IRP and the actual. And if load growth eventually subsumes those that depart, so be it. Then that charge should phase out. So I think those are some obstacles that could be removed. And then lastly, it's kind of a notional idea that maybe the RPS is no longer the only game in town. When we talk about California's goals, we talk about the RPS as if that's the only thing there is. But an increasing number of California customers are participating in CCAs in California and across the world, direct access renewables, and there's no way to count those, and in fact, they're hindered as RPS goes to higher numbers like 50%. That's creating grid congestion that then makes our economics be much more uncertain. So what if there were a way that we said California's goal is 50%, we want to go higher? Maybe that's not just moving the RPS to 55, or maybe it's adding a new category of voluntary activity that is governed by some structure and has some incentive. And the state's goal would be a combination of utility RPS and voluntary activities that are encouraged and have a formal status. We're very big on accountability. We use the same structures in reporting our renewable compliance as PG&E or Duke Energy on the East Coast. And so we have rigor in our reporting and would be very amenable to a structure that counted voluntary activities as part of the overall state's goal. Climate change is a big problem. Maybe we need more than just the utilities participating in this, and we certainly see that movement. Maybe it's time to acknowledge that.
Susan, I'm sure you've got some perspective on this.
I agree with everything he just